Your thoughts on the great Joe Sample?
Well, again, we were talking about this a little bit, and I mentioned my father. And, Joe Sample, my father was a huge Crusaders fan. And that's how my appreciation of the Crusaders began. But of course, the more and more I pursued music for myself, I got into the Crusaders more and more on an individual level. But when I think of Joe Sample and the Crusaders, I think the first thing I think about, we're here in the Bay Area, and I think about the movement of black people out of the South into the West Coast, during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Now, we know the Crusaders came a little bit later, like in the 60s, in order to further their musical career. But we know that they're originally from Houston, Texas.
Right.
Houston, Texas. And I think of, my father was from Arkansas. Oakland is a city that's heavy with people from Louisiana, Texas, you know what I mean? And I think of the Crusaders sound, that mixture that they had of jazz, from a hard bop level of jazz, influenced by Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, Horace Silver, certain recordings of Miles Davis like Walkin', Jimmy Smith, the great jazz organist, the whole school of organists, the Wes Montgomerys, those people who were able to take jazz and, Ramsey Lewis, Cannonball Adderley. I think of all those people, the Crusaders taking that vein of jazz, being musicians who could read music and having performed in school bands and stuff for the majority of their young lives. They took that, but they never lost that down home feeling too, which comes from the blues and from gospel. And there's something about that sound that the Crusaders had that resonated so much. Even when people thought that jazz was academic music and that jazz was a music that didn't really have appeal for the younger generation or for the average person, the Crusaders never had that problem. The Crusaders were always on the jukebox and on the turntables and in people's homes. So when I think of like a lot of our older generation out here in the Bay Area and stuff, if we mention that name to them, people that are way older than us, I'm talking about people that are in their 70s now, in their 80s, the Crusaders resonates like that. And I think it's because that sound that they had, it covers the uniqueness of black people moving from the South into the cities and so forth. That's what I really think of first when it comes to the Crusaders and Joe Sample.
It's amazing, too, when you start thinking about the various different lanes that the Crusaders have been in that people generally don't know about. They know about some of it. A lot of it they know about, and they don't realize that the Crusaders is involved into so many different other things. And I think about Berry Gordy, man. Even if we start talking about the Motown sound, one thing that I loved about Berry Gordy is he always surrounded himself, because he was a jazz lover as well.
Yes.
And was really into improvisation.
That jazz record store in
Detroit.
Right.
Right. And he, for the Snake Pit, which was the recording studio in Detroit, he had nothing but jazz players. With Jamerson, Ashford, Jack Ashford, all those cats. And then when he got to L.A., to the, when they were doing Hollywood Sound and or the Sound Factory or wherever it may be, he used jazz musicians again, and the Crusaders were very, very key to what the LA Motown sound would be. Wilton Felder and Joe Sample, of course. We're talking about the Jazz Crusaders career, Pacific Jazz Records, and those early records. It's just really, really unbelievable how they were actually able to go from just straight ahead to changing with the times, because a lot of people didn't necessarily change with the times and got left behind.
True.
And you get to that late 60s sound, that Fender Rhodes and that type of deal. The Wurlitzer was being used a lot, and of course, Bob James, Herbie, and all those people were of course very, very major. The Mizell brothers and just different people, but something about Joe Sample that was just a little bit different from everybody else. And even when you start getting into like Crusaders 1 or the Second Crusade, or like right after that Lighthouse 68 period, you start hearing like a lot of the sound that would be defined in those 70s movies, the so-called exploitation movies. The Crusaders sound was a big, big part of that. And even when you get to like the middle the 70s and the funk thing was happening. You know, they were very, very powerful and different. Everybody else was doing this thing over here, and Joe Sample and the guys were doing like completely something different, and you start thinking about keep that same old feeling and all of that. But even like right around the time when Wayne Henderson left the Crusaders, this is a story that a lot of people don't know. Fred Wesley, who's a friend of mine, is a really good friend of mine, he actually wanted to take Wayne Henderson's place in the Crusaders before he was dealing with P-Funk. He wanted to be a Crusader real, real bad, and he said that Sticks and Sample and decided to go with Larry Carlton, who had been there like David T. Walker. They had all been playing the sessions anyway. I think Arthur Wright, David T. Walker, Dean Parks, and those guys or whatever. And they decided to go that way, but most funk fans would be, and probably some of the funk musicians would be shocked to know that Fred Wesley, that was his first choice to go play with Joe Sample. So it just kind of, it resonates the power of what the Crusaders were doing, and you start talking about the sessions that those cats were doing. In particular, Dancing Machine, the Get It Together album. Joe Sample is Dancing Machine.
You always mentioned helped save the Jacksons' career at that particular time. Who would have ever thought that the Jacksons were close to getting dropped?
Yeah.
But they were. They were.
Yeah.
Kind of similar thing that happened with Stevie at one time, but we won't go into that.
Right. Well, yeah, with Sylvia, when they got Sylvia Moy and Hank Crosby. Yeah. But, you know, it's interesting. The Crusaders, man, and even when you start thinking about the work with Randy Crawford, Layla Hathaway,
I heard that.
You know, even Wilton Felder's first couple of albums.
Yeah, I remember Inherit the Wind with Bobby Womack. Man. The late great Bobby Womack had just passed. Yeah.
And Sample was just incredible, and whether it was the grand piano or that signature sound on the Rhodes. Just unbelievable Southern Comfort, man.
Yeah.
The second Crusade album, which features, I think, A Message from the Inner City that Joe Sample wrote. And if you listen to that song very closely, you can hear the sax parts that pretty much was the bass for Queen Latifah's Unity. You know, that da-da-da-da, you know, Sample wrote it.
Yes. They're a very heavily sampled group, too. And, you know, I'm glad you mentioned their studio work. Because the Crusaders, when you think about like when a jazz cat moves into the studio, they bring a certain kind of excellence and professionalism. Most of those cats read music, you know, and the Crusaders in particular, that's the thing that we often talk about. On the under, you know, kind of covertly, the Crusaders are one of the most important forces in the 70s, really, when you look at the variety of stuff they did.
I think that they're the unsung heroes of the 70s, because when you start thinking about Wilton Felder, sampling with those guys, and
Wilton
Wayne
Felder
Henderson
playing bass as well.
Oh, that's take it there, because I was going to go there. Take it there.
Okay, like say for instance, there's a record by Leon Haywood that formed the basis of Dr. Dre's success. You know, Ain't Nothing But a G Thing. I Want to Do Something Freaky to You. You know, Wilton Felder was on bass. He played that famous bass riff, and Joe Sample was the keyboardist on that gig as well. You know, and
Let's Get It On. Let's Get It On album.
Oh,
Let's Get It On. Joe Sample and Wilton Felder.
Yes.
Come get to this. Distant Lover. The Jackson 5, I Want You Back. Wilton Felder, Love You Save.
Yes. There was, you know, also Hughes Corporation.
Rock the Boat.
One of the records that helped get the disco movement started. The Crusaders are right there on that record, Rock the Boat. You know, some of Barry White's material. The Crusaders are right there on that stuff. You know, it's just incredible. Even if you look on the smooth rock side, like the Joni Mitchell albums and
Steels and Croft. Steels and Croft. The right album with Summer Breeze.
As a matter of fact, it's almost a guarantee. If you go into the record store right now and you look at the album, it could be an artist that you've never really been into, but when you see like Joe Sample, Wilton Felder, when you see some of the Crusaders' names on there, I generally buy it, Calvin. What do you do, man?
Oh yeah, hey, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I mean, their influence is immense. You can't even really. I don't even think there's been a complete discography really yet done on all the stuff they've done. You know, I still find stuff almost every time I go and look for music. I still find stuff that Joe Sample and Felder and Sticks played on. You know, especially when you throw Larry Carlton in there.
Who's coming to Yoshi's, by the way? Sometimes, Larry
fantastic guitar player.
Yeah,
It's like one of the foundational people now. Just like Joe Sample, though, on the Rhodes. You know, there was a big thing done for Fender Rhodes anniversary. They actually re-released the Fender Rhodes electric piano. You know, and there was a big thing done with different video series of different people speaking, like George Duke, different people who were just known to be masters on the Fender Rhodes. And Joe Sample is on there. You guys can check that out on the internet right now. It's on YouTube. But it was an interesting video because Sample was describing his Fender Rhodes technique, and he was saying that what he liked to do is he didn't turn the Fender Rhodes all the way up. He said he turned the volume knob about halfway, and that way when he played, he could control how loud and how powerful it would be. Then on other tunes, he could get that soft sound from it too. So that's just one of the techniques from the master that made his sound very unique when everybody was playing the Rhodes. Herbie Hancock, Stevie,
Bob James,
Dave Grusin,
Herbie.
Everybody had their own signature on the Rhodes. And even in that environment, with everybody playing a particular instrument,
he stood alone.
Exactly.
He definitely stood alone. Matter of fact, let's get into some more music from Joe Sample and the Crusaders. Man,